Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to another great episode of We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only place where you come to learn how to take apartment buildings and turn them into amazing communities. So I am your host, John Brackett. Have another great guest. His name is Todd Dexheimer. I got that right.
You got it right.
Awesome, man. So Todd, welcome to the show. I'm going to introduce you to our audience, invite them into this conversation so that they know a little bit more about who you are. So Todd Dexheimer is CEO of Venture D Properties, LLC, a former high school industrial tech teacher that started investing in real estate in 2008. And then since then, he's purchased and renovated over 900 units, including 150 flips. So he has a current portfolio of approximately $45 million in assets. And today, Todd's focus is on syndicating value-add multifamily properties in emerging markets, as well as coaching other inspiring investors to do the same. So Venture D Properties is the name of the LLC that he leads and operates. So hey, Todd, welcome to the show, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, John. Appreciate it.
Anytime, man. Our pleasure to have you. So hey, bud, this is going to be another amazing conversation, okay? Because prior to this, you and I talked a little bit about some of the markets that you're in. And as you know, right now, we're not completely through the pandemic, but it appears to be that there's, I don't want to say light at the end of the tunnel. Actually, yeah, I do want to say that. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
That's the optimist in you, at least.
That's the optimistic scenario, right? But I believe there is light at the end of the tunnel. But I also think that there's a lot of things that have been unaccounted for, such as employment or unemployment for that matter, and job creation. And I believe that a lot of the money that's going out into the marketplace has created a mask over what the real issue is, which is, hey, you got to create jobs and employ people so that we have money to spend out there in the marketplace, right? So my very first question is, okay, talk to us a little bit about how you got into this space, and then we're going to pivot into some of the economics.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was actually the last recession, right? 2008 when I first started investing. So literally the sky had just got done falling. The world crashed and everybody was running the other way.
Right.
I started studying and learning and wanting to be in real estate in like 2006, 2007, but didn't really know how to get into it. Wasn't ready. And then by the time I was ready, the bottom had completely dropped. And, like I said, everybody was running the other way. But for me, I was motivated. I really wanted to do real estate. I was in the spot. So as you said, I was a high school industrial tech teacher, right? And so I was in this spot as a teacher where it just wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And I was looking for something else. So, I thought about going back to school, becoming a doctor, whatever. Thought about doing that. But at the same time, I was reading these entrepreneurial books and happened to read some great entrepreneurial books, and then stumbled upon some really good real estate books. And one of them was The ABCs of Real Estate by Ken McElroy. And just like, wow, this stuff makes a lot of sense. And that's what got me really motivated to do it. And then, like I said, started buying in 2008, bought 3 properties pretty much one time. And by the way, I didn't have money. I had like an extra $20,000 that my wife and I had saved up through frugally through the last couple of years. So we spent money on these properties and brought other private money into them and started going to town, buying rentals, doing fix and flips, a lot of adversity along the way, a lot of just pivoting to try to figure out how do I continue to kick the rock down the road. And I wanted to build this massive rental portfolio. I didn't really know how to do it and didn't have the money and just kind of learned as I went. So it was quite the experience, but here I am today, 12 years later, still buying real estate.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So I'm going to recap a couple things that you said that really stood out, and then we're going to unpack that a little bit. So the first thing was you had no purpose, right? You said, man, I was not being fulfilled in what I was doing before. as a teacher. And here's the thing, here's what's crazy, right? When I look back on my life, and I can say the people that have really inspired me to do some really cool things have been actually, half of them have been my teachers in high school, which is, I'm really grateful for them. So that's why it was interesting to me that stood out. You're like, hey, John, I didn't have any purpose, man. I was searching for purpose, and I found that through real estate. The second thing was you thought about going back to school. And I hear that a lot, right? Which is really interesting to me. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. And the third thing was I wanted to get back and start learning again. Okay. And there's a big difference between going back to school and learning.
Yeah.
And I think people need to understand that learning is a skill, right? Learning is an evolving skill. So Todd, let's talk a little bit about going back to school. Why do you think that when, economically, the first reaction, and I think we're all guilty of this. I know, I did this as well, and I've done this, is economically, right? You get into a position where you're thinking, you know what, I need to pivot. And the mindset is not, I need to learn a new trade, something that I can apply immediately in the marketplace, but it's rather, I need to go get an education, right? I need to go back to school. So talk a little bit about that, right? You being a teacher, you'll be able to provide some great insight on the difference between education and actually learning something that you can immediately implement and improve your life. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, first, I think the reaction, or people think about going back to school, going back to college,
right?
Because that's just like natural. Like, what else do you do, right? You just go back to college. Like, that's what we think you have to do. So I think there's a lot of that is like just molded into our brains, right? We're brainwashed into thinking that that's the answer. But at the same time, when you think about it, like when I got into my real estate, the most important part was education, was to learn. And I learned and I went back to school. It just wasn't school, right? I read books and I listened to audio CDs. We didn't have podcasts back then. I did that type of stuff and went to any time a seminar was going on in town and it was real estate. It didn't matter what it was. I was trying to figure out how to attend it. So it's still going back to school. It's just a different way, right? It's the non-traditional way. The way, again, our brains are just, I think, molded into thinking that when we get ourselves educated, it has to be through college, right?
Right.
That somehow is the degree that you need. You need this degree where, you really don't. Depends on what you're doing, right? But you really don't. To be successful, you don't. You just need to be a student all the time.
Yeah. So, man, I'm going to touch on that because I think that's a really important point, right? We have a lot of listeners out there that are thinking, okay, I want to, a couple different thought processes, right? Is, okay, I want to get into this business. Where do I start? So we're going to touch on that through this conversation of learning. The other side of that is, hey, I'm at a point where I feel like I've peaked and I want to grow beyond where I am today, right? Okay, there's some additional learnings that have to happen for you to move beyond threshold, right? Or I call it push through threshold. And then thirdly, the other thought process is, okay, I'm a passive investor. I want to have some understanding of what I'm investing in. How do I make this investment to help create some predictability around this investment to create, of course, success for myself so I don't lose my investment, but more importantly, get a return on it and then get my money back and then move on and do something else and keep growing and expanding, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between learning and education. So when you look back to when you first started in 2008 relative to where you are today and the big lessons learned along the way, if you could do this over again, how would you approach learning and what would you do differently to accelerate the outcomes, right, that you've achieved? That's a good question, is to accelerate the outcomes. Let me add that.
Well, there's learning and there's doing too, right? So when we're just talking about the education side, the biggest thing, or the learning side, is the biggest thing that I would probably do differently is I would get to more of the networking events. I would get to more of those events where there's people actually doing the business and people doing where I want to go, right? And learn from that and get in the trenches with them. Something I just didn't even know it was possible to help bring money into some people's deals, somehow just partner with them or even passively invest. Like I'm flipping a house and, I make $50K. What do I do with that money? I could have invested in these syndications. There's a lot of learning I could have done along the way that would have been more action orientated learning. And I think that's super valuable. And network learning too. You're learning from other people. And you're at the same time, you're building relationships with them, which is so huge and something when I did this business in the beginning, I just completely discounted relationships as being part of my success. Like I was here to do my job and just grind, right? And too many relationships, in fact, was more or less a distraction to me. I only wanted to get to know the people that were ultimately, I needed to know. Otherwise, it's like, why do I want to waste my time? Because I got stuff to do, right? I got to put my head down.
Right.
So I think that would be one of the biggest things. I mean, ultimately, when you think about education, learning, it's all good, right? It's great. And I'm not going to discount it because I love it. And I go through different seasons as well. But it's all about taking action. All right. I know some very well educated people. I know some people that have gone through courses, who hired private coaches. I can think of one guy right now. I mean, he's went through syndication courses. He's went through multifamily courses. He's went through single family flipping courses, like all these courses. And he's still not taking action. He's hired coaches. He's hired motivational coaches. He's hired multifamily coaches, syndication coaches, like all kinds of coaches. He still hasn't taken action. You can be greatly educated. That's phenomenal. But if you're not going to take action, like what's the point, right? So I think that we have to make sure
I want to tell you,
important.
Yeah, super important. So let me tell you a really quick story. Okay. I remember going to a seminar, and this was, I think, in 2010. Okay. And it was on estate planning. There was a component. Well, it was really real estate, but they had a component in there on estate planning, right? So we did this breakout session, and I had an hour. So I go, I'm going to go check this out, go to this estate planning course, if you will. And then in addition to the course, they started talking about corporate structures. All right.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting in there, and it was actually a pretty big class. I was really surprised because normally these breakout sessions are really small, right? You probably have like 10 people in there. This one had probably 30 to 40 people in there, right? And so I go, okay, well, and the speaker was a good speaker. That person was known fairly well throughout the nation. So I go, okay, let me check this out, right? So we spent about 10 minutes talking through all of these structures, another 15 minutes talking through even more complex structures, right? And I'm listening to this, and the guy to my left, I'll never forget that, he started talking to, there was another guy right to the left of him, right? So we started talking, networking, right? I remember asking him, he goes, oh yeah, I did that, and I did that, talking through the different things that the attorney was suggesting.
Yeah.
And he's worked with the attorney before. The attorney was the one who put these structures in place, right? So I said, well, man, how much did that cost? He goes, I think it was about $15,000, right? And I said, well, how many deals have you bought? And it was 0. I said, okay, well, you go down with that. I'm going to go over here and do some more deals. And I never forgot that, man. I never forgot that, right? Because look, to your point about spending a bunch of money on learning, right? Actually, I'm going to call that education. I think that's a distinction. Okay. You can spend a bunch of money on education, but learning is when you actually apply and do. So I love the fact that you talked about taking action, because I think that's where the learning actually happens, is we learn by doing, right? We learn by doing, especially high value, big ticket items, man. There's a lot of complexity in getting to the finish line. And there's just things that you cannot learn unless you're actually taking action. Just impossible to learn. You can learn theory, okay? But as I tell people, don't be a theorist. Okay, go out there and find ways to get this stuff done. So I really appreciate sharing that, man. I think that's huge insight. So Todd, I'm going to shift a little bit, okay? And now we're going to get into some of the economics, man. So now,
let's do it.
Just to summarize, right? You gave our audience some amazing insights around the things, well, really more of the key distinctions, rather, that our audience can pick up to accelerate some of the things that they're doing. Okay.
And real quick, let me just say there's 4 types of learning that.
Let's do it. Let's talk about the 4 types of learning, man.
Well, I shouldn't say maybe not types, but there's like 4 areas that I really think people need to focus on. And first and foremost, it's your craft, right? So if you're a real estate investor, it's real estate. You need to understand what real estate is. You need to understand the nuts and bolts. You need to continue to educate yourself on what's going on in the economy and all that kind of stuff, right? Then there's the business. You need to know how to properly operate and run a business. So you need to read books like E-Myth, like that type of stuff, right? You get your brain right. If you don't have your mindset right, if you're not motivated, if you're not knowing like what you're doing this for, you're going to struggle. You've got very limiting beliefs. It's not going to happen. You got to shift your paradigm. And then the last one is, how are we going to live a full kind of life, which kind of into that more mindset thing, but how are we going to live that full life and actually do the things that we want to accomplish? So I think those are really key things that people need to focus on. And I don't really spend a ton of time on real estate education, although I do a lot of, industry studies. I'm looking at what's going on. So that's my education now. It's not learning like what a cap rate is, right? But I'm always constantly changing. Okay, I got to make sure I do some mindset this quarter. I got to look at some business strategies. And see, I always got to be thinking and going through these different steps and processes.
Okay, cool. So I really like what you said. 4 types of learning. There's understanding your industry, creating mastery around your craft, mindset's important. And finally, you have to have a balance to be able to tie all that stuff together, right? Which I really love. So I appreciate you sharing that. So now we're going to shift, Todd, to talking a little bit about the industry, right? We're going to talk a little bit about one of the key learning metrics, which you just described, which was the industry. So we're going to get into a little bit of the economics, right? So, okay, let me set the frame. So COVID-19, March hit. Everybody was mandated to go inside and hide from the world. All right. And so now we're starting to get back out, right? We're starting to get back out. We're starting to have some interaction. Business is moving forward a little bit, but there's still some issues in the economy that a lot of people are not discussing. What's mostly being discussed is how we're going to inject more money into the economy, how the government is going to help prop up the challenges that we're facing now. And that's usually at this point, 90% of it is being done through economic stimulus, which is also known as money, right? No matter how you slice the pie. So with that being said, what are some of the things that come to mind right now, man, that really concern you about where we are today? And then we're going to talk about some of the opportunities that you see as a result of that.
I think my biggest concern, and maybe this has been longstanding, is that people expect the government to take care of them. So they're waiting for this stimulus. They don't want to do anything. They're just waiting, right? They're waiting for COVID-19 to disappear. They're waiting for the election. They're waiting for the stimulus. They're just waiting for these events to happen to where they can, get back to living or like do the next thing, whatever. That's the biggest concern, I think, is that there's so many people that something like this happens. And good, like, look, COVID-19 it's been tough, right? There's been people losing their lives. There's been people losing their businesses. There's been people losing their jobs. So I get it. But at the same time, you have to look inside yourself and what you can do versus counting on everybody else, counting on some changes happening that you have no control over too. Like, that's the thing. You got to control what you can control. Economically, I mean, for sure there's concerns. When you dump billions of dollars into the economy, like, it's cause and effect, right? You're going to have results from that. Right now, we've got a ton of money floating. I think you said it, like, the economy's wearing a mask right now. We're all wearing masks, but the economy is too. Like, we don't know what's behind that mask. We don't really fully know. I don't think we fully understand. I don't think anybody does. And I don't want to pretend like I'm smart enough to fully understand what's going to happen with all of this new money and the next stimulus. What's going to happen with all this stimulus, with all this money that's flowing? Right now, especially if we get the second stimulus, like, what we have to pay back as a government, like, our interest on that is greater than the money coming in. So, like, how are we ever going to pay for it, right? How's it ever going to get paid back?
Right.
Something's got to give. I get the need for stimulus and the desire to push it out there. I get nervous when it happens because, again, it's cause and effect. Like, you can't just throw a bunch of money out in the market and not expect anything to happen. Something's going to happen. There's a lot of theories out there. There's a lot of super smart economists, and I hear one side of the coin and I hear the other side. There's a lot of theories out there. I guess I control what I can control.
Okay, cool. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the perspective. Okay, so let's talk about some of the opportunities that you see as a result of some of the disruptions that you just described, right? And some of the uncertainty. that you just described. And then after we talk about that, I'm going to come back to your initial point about just maybe some of the stagnation that we're seeing right now with people. And I think that's a perception, but go ahead, man.
Yeah. So we're pushing forward with our business. We did take a little pause when everything kind of went down to see, okay, well, like what's happening? Are we going to start seeing deals coming up? What's going to happen? I don't know. Are we going to see some great, fantastic, amazing deals? Possibly. But again, we got a ton of money that was just thrown out there. So we might not see them. If we don't see a lot of tenants not paying rent, if we don't see homeowners not paying their mortgage, you're not going to see foreclosures in this mass evictions. People keep on talking about these massive amount of evictions. Well, guess what? Like we have some evictions, but our percentage of people that are not paying rent is pretty much the exact same amount as it's always been. They just can stay in our apartments for a lot longer now, right? So before, where they wouldn't pay rent, day 5, they're going to, we're filing the eviction, and by, the end of the month or before, most states that I'm in, it's by the 20th, they're out. Well, now, depending on what state we're in the great state of Minnesota, where I invest, some of my properties are, we can't evict, period. So some of these people owe us, $10,000. Some people from other states, they'll get 2 months behind before we can actually get them out. But again, the percentage is the same. So we're still collecting 97% of our rents from our tenants, 97, 98% of our rents from our tenants. It's just right now, we don't see a ton of changes where our occupancy is super strong. Everything's super strong. We are seeing some cracks, and it depends on the city you're in. So I think that's the other thing. This is fairly localized, right? New York, San Francisco, they're seeing massive changes in rents. I think I just saw a statistic yesterday where San Francisco has seen a 24% decline in rents. That's huge, right? Mm-hmm. Overall in the country, though, we're at negative 1%. If you pop out New York City, San Francisco, and some of the other cities that are being greatly affected right now, we're at pretty much a net gain of 0 on rents. So we're not seeing massive rent declines. What's going to happen? I don't know. But here's what I think you have to look at. What's your buying criteria? What we're looking at is we want cash flowing real estate. We want real estate that's going to cash flow, that we're going to have good, solid debt on, and that's got a value add component and well located. Okay. So I look at that and go, well, what if I would have bought in 2005 or 2006, right? If I would have bought a well located property with good financing that's cash flowing, right? And even didn't have a value add component, but especially had a value add component, 15 years later, I'm looking pretty dang good. I'm smiling ear to ear that I kept that property, that I bought that property, because it's worth way more today than it was back then. And I've paid 15 years of my loan down. I think when you look back at the history of real estate in general, let's just look way back. Let's go way back. Let's go 40, 50 years back.
Let's do it.
Or longer, right? When we look at cap rates of multifamily properties, you look at cap rates 40, 50 years ago, right? And you can look at, and it's not perfect, right? It goes up and down like anything, but you look at that and the cap rates 40, 50 years ago were much higher. I'm talking like 7, 8 cap to now that same property, that same area, everything being equal, we've got like 2-point decline. But if we were at a 7 cap, we're now at like a 5 cap nationwide. And what's happened, and we're probably higher than that, quite frankly. That's likely understating that what's happened. Yeah. What's happened is real estate's become institutionalized, right? It's became something that everybody can buy and that the big institutions will also buy. That's huge. That's a huge difference and a huge shift where you used to be mom and pop. You needed to know somebody to buy it. You needed to be wealthy, right? The syndication thing, yeah, did it happen? But nothing like it does today. There was no such thing as crowdfunding. So cap rates, in my opinion, are going to just continue to get compressed. And we also look at what was going on back 40, 50 years ago. We didn't have a global economy. People from China were not coming in and buying real estate. People from Canada, who is actually our biggest buyer of real estate right now, is people from Canada. They didn't come in. They weren't coming in to buy real estate, Europe and so on. And when you look at their cap rates right now, China, Europe, Canada, you're buying cap rates there for like 3%. So they're coming to the US and going, holy cow, we can buy a 5 cap here? That's amazing. But there's just big differences. Now, I'm not saying underwrite for cap rates to continue to crash. I still actually underwrite for cap rate expansion. Yeah. But I think we're going to see the economy continue to be more and more global. And that plays well for somebody who wants to buy right now.
Okay, so let me touch on a couple things there, right? So I really appreciate the fact that you brought up some historical data there. So one of the data points that you're referencing is cap rates, right? Over the last 50 years, that the trend is that cap rates are decreasing. Well, I think one of the main reasons for that is monetary policy, right?
Well, and that plays into it big time. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even mention that, really.
Right. So the cost of capital, the cost of debt, rather. Well, number one, we have more debt being injected into the marketplace to drive our economic growth, right? So that's part of that era. And two, the cost of that debt has gone down consequently, which only makes sense, right? The spread between cap rates and that cost, right? In this market, well, technically, I don't know if it stayed, I think, relatively the same, but the cost of debt has gone down. So the point there being is monetary policy has been a big driver for that, right? I mean, you have a lot of money out there in the marketplace that exercising their monetary policy to stimulate the economy. Cost of debt has gone down, and that's flooded the market with more dollars, right? In this case, in the real estate markets. And of course, that has created demand and has compressed cap rates over that time period. So I think that's a really big one. But I think there's also another way to look at that as well, right? So for example, historically, using that era, here in the United States, one of our big GDP drivers has been real estate for that reason, right? Here in the US, we create a lot of leverage with monetary policy and dumping tons of dollars into the marketplace with monetary policy. And at this point, I think that's too ingrained into our fabric to make a hard right. And it's too difficult to unwind that.
Right.
So consequently, I do agree. Real estate's going to be a really good place to be over the next couple of years for that reason. And now the fact that government spending, the government has dumped $3 trillion into the marketplace. And that's just going to drive inflation. It may take some time to creep in, but it will. So those are other reasons why I like real estate. But, a good buddy of mine said something to me, man, and he's a pretty smart guy. He owns about 3 million square feet of commercial real estate throughout the nation. So a really good guy to go to when, I just need another opinion other than wanting to hear myself talk, right? So one of the things that I asked him is I said, well, what do you think of this? This meaning what we're talking about now. And he said, John, let me try to paraphrase this, because I know I'm not going to be able to quote him verbatim. But he said, if you really think about it, and I believe he's in his early 70s now. But he said, if you really think about it, if I look back from when I started until now, his comment was that incomes haven't gone up. Incomes have not risen, but things have gotten more expensive. So I want to say that again. Incomes have not gone up. So our buying power has actually gone down.
Right. Yeah, exactly that. Our buying power has gone down.
Our buying power has gone down.
Yeah.
But inflation, right? Prices have gone up historically over that time period.
Yeah.
So his comment was, well, look, if you simply look at how the US engineers this marketplace, it's probably smart to bet alongside how that's being engineered. And his comment was like, bet on inflation, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how this economy is engineered. So usually when you want to chase inflation and you want to hedge yourself against inflation, you buy real assets, right? Yep. Real estate, precious metals, et cetera. Yep. I don't know much about precious metals other than what I give my wife and my daughters, but I do know a little bit about inflation as it relates to the real estate market. So that's what I play. So I think, man, you bring up a great point, right? About money into the marketplace, right? Inflation and just some things to be aware of. But our economy at this point is engineered to use monetary policy to drive productivity, right? I don't even want to say productivity because that's probably an overstatement, but to drive inflation really is what's going on.
Yep.
Okay. And I think there's a huge opportunity in real estate because of that. Institutional investors, they figured this out a long time ago. And so I think you have more money being dumped into the marketplace. But man, I think that's a great point, Todd. So I really, really appreciate you bringing that up because I think these are the things, man, that aren't discussed enough. But it gives people perspective, right? There's no right, there's no wrong. It just is. But at least we can use this information to make some decisions against.
Well, and look, I mean, could real estate crash? Yeah, absolutely. Like we could see some weakening. We could see a lot of things. But here's the thing: is like I've never been of the mindset, and I shouldn't say never. Like I've gotten caught up in playing the economy before. But I know some people who got out of the market in like 2014 because they thought the market was already too hot in like 2014. I know some people that got out in 2015 and 16. And it's like, I mean, especially like you look, if you got out in 2014, you had 6 years of an amazing real estate market. And actually, we're still going. Like it's still really good. You know, you've had 6 years of amazing real estate that you missed out on. Like, what's the point of trying to time this market? Now, I'm not saying to go out there and be sloppy and just buy everything possible. That's crazy. You still have to buy good cash flowing assets. And the other thing is, let's look in good cities with people coming into the city or net migration, right? And we want net job growth. And we want to get into the path of progress, not just plop yourself down in the worst neighborhood of the best city. Like that doesn't do you any good either. But if you do those things or paying attention to what you're doing, yeah, the economy might go down. But again, like I said, if you bought in 2006, if you bought in a good, well-located market with cash flow, with good debt, you're fine. Like you did good.
I like how you said that. You're fine. And you can do good. We're going to quote that, Todd. We're going to quote that, man. That was good.
People get so worked out, man, about just timing the market. Like, when should I buy?
That's something out of a movie. So, hey, man, let's pivot a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
Let's give our audience some learning lessons or some lessons learned, as I call it. So let's talk a little bit about your greatest success story in real estate, maybe an apartment building example, what that looked like. Talk us through the story, man, and share the greatest lesson that you extracted from that our audience can apply in their deals.
Man, I don't know. There's so many great stories and there's so
give us the best one.
Opposite stories. I don't know which one to give, quite frankly. I think there's a lot of fun ones, but I think one of the more fun ones or kind of cool ones is about a 84 unit building. It was in a new market. I'd never been to that market. And I was talking with these brokers and we actually drove through this property. It wasn't listed. And we were driving to go see another property and we were taking a kind of a U-turn through this property.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, let's buy this one. And he's like, well, actually, I know the owner. So we went and called the owners and we got the deal under contract. As we were doing that, I wanted to buy the other property that was actually listed. And I was hoping to buy them together because they weren't big enough individually. I wanted 100 units or bigger for scale, right? For scale purposes, having 100 units, we can have on-site staff. And so we got this 84. We didn't get the other one. And I said, well, look, I need to buy another property. Let's call every single owner within a half-mile radius of this property. And so they did. And they called and they ended up finding a couple people that were happy to sell. We worked a deal with this seller. The property was like 65% occupied. It was a mess and it was actually good, right? He had done like half the renovations to it. It was 120 units. He had done half the renovations to it, but hadn't finished the rest of them over like a 4-year period of time. And it was super low occupancy. So we worked this deal out and we ended up doing seller financing for a 120 unit apartment building. And I did it creatively. So I didn't want to come up with the down payment to give him a 20% down payment that he wanted and also come up with the renovation money, right? Instead, how I worked it is a construction loan, right? So what we did is we gave him a down payment. I think it was right around 8%. of the purchase price. And then we put an additional 12%, it was like $700,000 or something like that, into an escrow account. And that escrow account was held by an attorney, and that we could take draws on that money as we completed construction. And then he could take that money. If we didn't make our mortgage payments, he could take that to make our mortgage payments and eventually foreclose on us, right?
I like it.
It was kind of a win-win. It allowed us to leverage the property way, way better. It was set up a construction loan, super cheap way to do it, versus a bridge loan. Just a great creative way to do it. We had some hiccups on that property, ups and downs, but it really helped us be able to scale with the neighboring property. So that was really huge. It was down the road, maybe a quarter mile. So that helped a ton. And now, like I said, I think we dropped down to like 50% occupancy at one time, 52 or something like that. COVID actually hit and we're at 76% occupancy. And COVID
Is that because of the renovations or?
Yeah, renovations. And we were trying to get change property management. So a ton. I learned so much on this property. So much of like what to do, what not to do.
Right.
It was a great experience, but we started at like 76% occupancy. I'm like, oh crap. Like we're just picking up occupancy, just starting to get traction. And of course it's spring, right? Like that's the best season to lease. Today we're sitting at 97% occupancy. This month we have collected more money in rents than we've ever done before. It's going to be our best month. But at the same time, last month was our best month. This month is even better. And I think we are like $3,000 ahead of last month. So it's been a great success. We'll see, knock on wood, I've got a contract on it to sell. And that's for about $600,000 more than what I projected to sell in 5 years. So it'd be another, 3+ years down the road from now. We're already actually above that. So our value has gone up that much. It's been great. It's been
awesome, man. Awesome. So, hey, Todd, what was the greatest lesson learned from that for our audience?
Well, I think there's probably two key takeaways. One key takeaway is you have to ask, right? This deal wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been great. It wouldn't have been nearly as good of a deal if we didn't do this seller financing. And so many people are scared to even ask that, like, oh, the guy's going to reject me. Well, I come to the table with two offers, right? I come with an offer, I'm going to buy this cash and then you can finance it, right? Seller financier. However it's going to work. Sometimes it's not even seller financing. Maybe it's a carryback. Maybe it's even a partnership with the seller. So we're looking at a deal right now, an office deal right now. And we have put the option out there for the seller to stay in the deal, keep $1.5 million in the deal. And I think we're going to get the deal done. So it's like, just get creative and don't worry about if they say no. So what? Who cares?
Yeah. I get it.
So that's one big lesson. And then the other one is with property management companies, just pivot as quickly as when there's some things that aren't going right. Pivot away from them quickly. Find somebody new.
That's great.
It's not necessarily just, and it's not necessarily property management, right? It's anybody who's working for you. When it's not working, don't wait. Go ahead and give them one strike and try to fix it and make them understand what's going wrong. But if it doesn't get fixed quickly, you've got to move on. It's not worth your time. And there's so many times where I've done it where it's like, I should have done it earlier. You never sit there and go, oh man, did I do it too early? I've never had that in my career where I go, oh man, did I fire that company too early?
Yeah, man. I think that's great advice is don't wait, right? You need to make a decision. Doing nothing is not a decision. I think that's really the problem. I think the issue is inability to make a decision, right?
Yes.
Someone was asking me the other day, what are some of the great qualities that I've seen over the years with really good investors? And I think the number one, especially in a market like this, is the ability to make a decision. And doing nothing is not a decision, right? And I have to remind myself of that all the time. Doing nothing is not a decision. Got to make a decision to take action forward. So I really appreciate you sharing that, man. That's awesome. Hey, so within that, we're coming down to the end of the show. Let's unwind or unwrap a challenge Because it sounds like you had quite a few of them in that team, right? What was the greatest challenge and the greatest lesson learned from that?
You want to talk that deal specifically, or just anything in my?
Let's use that one, because it looks like that one was kind of loaded with some challenges too.
Yeah, there's two of them in there. I think the biggest challenge in that, and quite frankly, was lack of connection with the property management company, really for them understanding my vision. So I'm going to blame it on myself, right? Because there's nobody else to blame. I can go ahead and blame it on them.
Yeah, that's a good
Is
job.
that really, valuable? I didn't give them my vision clear enough for them to understand and to be able to actually
execute.
Yeah. And I likely set them up for failure. Now, there's a couple things, like looking back, were they the best management company? Probably not. They weren't hyper-focused in that market. They were hyper-focused in a market an hour away. They wanted to get into this market, but they weren't hyper-focused. They had a couple other assets, and those struggled. So again, I'll put that on me because I chose a company who wasn't hyper-focused in my market. Like, that's a bad decision. And like I said, our just visions didn't align. And I continued to try to teach them my vision, even when they had apprehension with it, even when they didn't really believe in it and didn't really follow through with it. And that's where I talked about, like, you got to pivot away from them. You got to say, okay, we're not aligning. Like, you have to take responsibility. We're not aligning somehow, whether it's I'm not being clear enough or it's not in their wheelhouse, whatever it is, you've got to take responsibility and go, okay, it's time for me to pivot and find a company that does, find a company that can.
Yeah. Hey, man, that's great advice. The biggest takeaway there is don't blame other people, right? Don't blame other people.
Yeah, you can't.
You have to take responsibility for the decisions that we make.
Right.
And more importantly, learn how to communicate an effective message.
Yeah.
That was something that I had to make some adjustments on as well. I had a similar experience, but it was with a bank. And what I realized, man, is I was not good at communicating an effective message. I just wasn't, right? I had great ideas and I had things that I know would work, but, I wasn't able to communicate them clearly enough to get people on board. And that was a life lesson that I'm really grateful it happened when I was very young or younger. I'm still young, man, but when I was younger, right?
Yeah.
So it happened then. So I really like what you said about learning how to communicate an effective message, because without vision, Todd, the people will perish, man.
Yeah, it's
perish,
true.
right?
And look, our brains hold all this stuff in, and we're like, oh, yeah, like this is perfect. This is beautiful. This is going to work amazing. But if we don't actually express that to other people, and more than just like, look, we think people can see what we see in our brain. Like, that doesn't work. They can't peer into our brain and see the property.
Right.
See our vision for the future. So we have to actually, it needs to be in writing. We need to have images. We need to really be showing them a clear path. And we don't have it truly clear. I mean, like,
that's the teacher coming back out in you, man. The teacher's coming out.
I'm serious.
I appreciate it.
I've hired people like, assistants, and I hire them and they don't follow through with what I want to do. And I get mad. But then when I look back and I go, well, it's because I wasn't clear enough. Like, they don't know what I know. Like, I know how the business runs. Like, I know what is in my brain.
Right.
But they don't know. And if I didn't teach them, how do I expect them to do a good job?
That's 100% true. Yeah. Well, hey, buddy, we're at the end of our show. I want to thank you for being an amazing guest, man. This has been a great conversation, right? Because we talked about the importance of learning how to learn. And there's a difference between education and learning. And the big difference is that learning is about taking action, right? And we learn forward when we act. We talked also about the importance of relationships and networking, man. And you gave some great examples of that, and how initially when you started off in this business, you did not put the time and energy, or make the investment rather, in relationships. Yeah. And it slowed you down or didn't accelerate you as much as it is right now. But hey, Todd, here's the great news. The great news, man, is you can add me to your network. Yeah. I'm your friend now.
Yeah. We're still young too, man. I mean, look, it's just like as long as you learn from these mistakes and
I love it.
What you've done, you're going to be fine.
I love it. Hey, so then you kind of slow pitched us into third base, man, by talking about the 4 types of learning. Okay. And that was industry, mastering your craft, the importance of mindset, right? To stay motivated and focused on a task. And then, of course, balance to bring all that stuff together.
Yeah.
Okay. And then lastly, man, what you did for us as a treat to bring us into home plate is you gave us success stories and some of the challenges that you're able to overcome. And one of the key principles on the challenge was the importance of making a decision.
Yeah.
Right. The importance of making a decision, absolutely crucial. Doing nothing is not a decision. And more importantly, without vision, man, the people shall perish, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be good vision casters as leaders. And then the big takeaway from the success story that you shared, okay, man, it's not coming to me, but it will. It will. Come on.
Get creative. You got to do stuff. Like you've got to take action, right?
You got to take action, man. Be creative.
Yeah.
Take action. I really love that. So Todd, you've been tremendous, man. So before we ask our audience or ask you to share with our audience how they can get a hold of you, Todd, what is the one question that you have of me, man, since I've been asking you questions for the last 40 minutes that you feel can add value to our audience?
Well, that's kind of cool. All your guests, what's the one prevailing thing that the majority of them say that would lead your audience to success?
That would lead our audience to success?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great one. No one's ever asked that. The one consistent theme that will lead our audience to success. That's an easy one. Take action.
Yeah.
Okay. Regardless of where you think you are or where you think you're not. Okay. And I'm really grateful for my dad about this, man. My dad was really good at instilling this in us. Irrespective of where you think you are, where you think you're not, the cure of all is action.
Yeah.
The end.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. Because as you take action, you start learning as you go, right? And you can make adjustments as you go. I would say the follow-up to that, though, which is probably just as important, is learning how to make adjustments along the way.
Yeah.
Okay? Huge, man. Huge.
Yeah.
Because the success, once you start getting good at action and implementing, is in the adjustments, right? Nothing in business is stagnant. Business does not stay the same. It just doesn't. And so it's all about learning how to make adjustments along the way. And that, by the way, man, is a skill. You know, you can learn that stuff.
Well, and one of the things you said there, you're right. You said to take action. That's super important. I think one thing that paralyzes some people from taking action is they go, well, I don't know if that's what I should do. Like,
perfect plan. I get it.
Yeah. Is this the perfect plan? Should I really buy multifamily, or should I be in? Well, you know what? What you said second is we always got to be adjusting. It's okay to take action and not be the perfect action as long as we adjust and bring it to where we want to go, right?
Yeah, man. I love that. Todd, you've been amazing, man. Really appreciate you as a guest. Todd, how do people get in touch with you, man? How do our audience get in touch with you? They want to learn more about what you do and how you do it.
Yeah. Well, I got a few places they can reach me. I guess my main website, they can get to me everywhere, right? So it's venturedproperties.com, venturedproperties.com. They can see what I got going on. I got education stuff on my website. If they want to talk to me, have a conversation with me about syndication, awesome. Great. I do multifamily coaching for people who really want to learn this business and not even learn the business, take action, right? So they can reach me there.
I like that.
Or my sub website, which is coachwithdex.com for that as well. I'm also on social media, so it's pretty easy to look me up under Todd Dexheimer. There's just me. So,
all right, awesome.
Facebook and LinkedIn are probably the best.
Beautiful, man. Todd, you have been a tremendous guest, man. I can't wait to invite you back so we can talk more about how to not only take action, but make adjustments along the way. I wish you continued success, and I'll talk to you soon, man.
Thanks, John.
Anytime, buddy. Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.